It's Just with Jordan Simone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Justice with Jordan Simone, a show that talks about everything and anything social justice, from racism to ableism and everything in between. I am your most grateful and gracious hostess, Jordan Simone, and I cannot wait to talk about this week's topic with you. So, if you were here with us last week, or 2 weeks ago, but last episode, we covered feminism, the basics, what it is, why we need it, why it matters, and why we should all be feminists, including each and every one of you. If you missed it, go back and watch it. I'll be right here when you get back. But if you caught it and you feel like you're already up to speed, then great. We're going to dive into this week's topic, which is the different branches of feminism. Disclaimer real quick, this is not an exhaustive list. There are at least 15 types of feminism. I will not be getting into all of those, but you are free to do research on your own time. And there are a bunch of different iterations, probably beyond those 15. None of those are the quote unquote correct solution, but I just want to provide some different examples that we talk about today, some different versions that we subscribe to today. This is not a history lesson. I will not be going into the history of feminism. This is just feminism that we see today in a more modern context. All right, so let's get into it. The different branches of feminism. So just to recap what feminism is, in case you missed it, in case you forgot, feminism is the advocacy for the political, social, and economic equality of the sexes. It is led and focused on women, but it is not by any means woman exclusive. So anybody can be a feminist. Everybody should be a feminist. Feminism, good feminism, should advocate for all people involved, not just women, but it is woman-led, woman-centric, because a lot of women feel the brunt of misogyny, the patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to kick it off, we're going to start on one end of the spectrum in terms of feminism, and that is liberal or mainstream feminism. This is the one that you think of probably the most when you think about feminism. Whenever people mention feminism, they talk about things like women's rights for abortion and having access to abortion and different types of healthcare based on feminine needs. This is the feminism that really focuses on sexual harassment. This is the feminism that focuses a lot on women in the household making enough money, making the same amount of money as their male counterparts, as well as having access to affordable, accessible childcare. This is the type of feminism that focuses a lot on maternity leave. This is a lot of the feminism that focuses on like reproductive rights. This is the one we think of the most, largely because in a modern sense, I'm talking in like a 2022 sense, this is the one that we see a lot of white feminists participating in. This doesn't mean by any means that these are exclusively focused on white women. And this doesn't mean that this is the only branch of feminism that focuses on all these different subjects. This is this type of feminism that focuses on these big tenets, because these are the different things that white women tend to experience the most. So these are the things that we see the most in media. So feminism goes a lot deeper than this, but this is mainstream feminism. It's also called mainstream feminism because this is the type that where instead of trying to dismantle systems, it is trying to overturn different legislative rights or legislative decisions to introduce access for women. So if that makes any sense, it's like instead of like dismantling the patriarchy as a whole, mainstream feminism is going to try to work within the patriarchy, within the system, and overturn laws to make them more equal. So instead of like, throwing the entire healthcare system away, it's how can we make changes within the healthcare system to make them more equitable to women. This is kind of like the chillest. This is the one that we know the most about. This is one we see the most. On the opposite end of that spectrum, there is radical feminism, which advocates for the complete and total U-Haul of the system. This is the type of feminism that truly believes that the male experiences and that gender roles at this point are so ingrained in our system and in our society that they have taken such importance over literally everybody else that it is impossible to keep things the way that they are. There's no amount of turning things over. There is no amount of working within the system and causing change. Radical feminists really believe deep down in their hearts that everything needs to be thrown away. This is not a bad way to view feminism. In fact, this radical approach can encourage us to think outside of the box and to think beyond some of the different examples that we would think about when we think of a more modern feminism. However, it is definitely the most radical type of feminism, which is how it earned the name radical feminism. After that, we were going to go into a couple of more different versions of feminism, but those are the big two on different ends of the spectrum. Everything else is going to fall somewhere between A and B. We're going to get into those right after a quick commercial break. Stay tuned. All right, so we've covered the two on different spectrums. We've covered liberal feminism and mainstream feminism. We've covered radical feminism. Somewhere in the middle is Marxist feminism. Marxist feminism is also known as socialist feminism. If you're familiar with Marx and socialism, it's a lot about money. It's a lot about capitalism versus socialism, that whole vein of thought. This is how feminism bleeds into that. So Marxist feminism is a type of feminism that believes that capitalism was designed to hinder women. It was designed to hold women back in terms of money and economics so that men can get ahead. It is essentially saying that the way our society is built now, it is built on the back of women. It is built on women staying down, for lack of a better term, in order to promote everybody else. And so this type of feminism feels like, the patriarchy exists so that women will stay in the household and work, so that men can go out and work jobs, and women will have nothing at the end of the day. It is not an equitable system. It is not a fair system. And so Marxist feminists believe that gender equality actually involves dismantling capitalism overall. So it's a little bit closer to that radical side of feminism, just because it is talking about dismantling entire systems, but by no means is it saying dismantle every single system that we have. This one is focused a lot on our economic systems, especially capitalism. So if you live, United States, most of the Western countries, a large part of the world, Marxist feminism is at least something to keep in your back pocket as you live in a capitalist society. After that, we have ecofeminism, which is feminism that focuses on the environment, which is something that we should all care about, which is why ecofeminism is a great idea. It uses a little bit of what we know about history and what we are experiencing today to talk about how the patriarchy uses the same systems, the same ideas, the same methods to control the earth that we use to control women. Ecofeminists tend to believe that having a healthy planet is a big part of having true equality, just because a lot of the same systems that we use for destroying the planet, we also use for keeping women down. And what that means in a more, colloquial sense, in an easier to digest sense, is that when we trap women in the house, for lack of a better word, and then we pollute that house, we pollute that neighborhood, we pollute the streams, we pollute the water sources, they're the ones who catch the brunt of that pollution. They're the ones who catch the brunt of that struggle. If we, make it a woman's job to take children to the doctor and then put the doctor hundreds of miles away on poorly paved roads that are covered with, potholes and craters, then we have both destroyed the earth and we have also held women back. And so in dismantling one, we dismantle the other. And that's the basic gist of ecofeminism. It also ties into environmental racism, which we can cover later. After ecofeminism, we move into some more intersectional, or inclusive, let me not say intersectional because that gives myself away. We get into some more inclusive types of feminism, starting with multicultural feminism, which is a type of feminism that includes, for the first time, the idea of race and how racial ideas and gendered ideas impact women of color. So multiracial feminism really focuses on women of color. It is not to the exclusion of white women by any means. It's not to the exclusion of white people, but the focus is on those nuances, those intersections between race and gender. This tends to focus on Asian people. This tends to focus on Latino women. This tends to focus on Black women, Indigenous women, and just, their lived experiences. Kind of how we talked about a couple of weeks ago with intersectionality. This bleeds into that. However, by no means is this intersectional feminism. Oh, we have a question. What is your question? So Rhonda asks, what is your favorite branch of feminism? Well, Rhonda, I will tell you. So we'll start off with my second favorite branch of feminism, which is brilliantly timed because it's actually intersectional feminism. If you've never heard of intersectionality, go back a couple of videos. We talked about it. It is a concept created by Kimberly Crenshaw that encourages us to look at all facets of our identity in conversation with each other. So it is not separating, for me, it is not separating my blackness from my womanness. It is not separating my womanness from my regionality of being a Southern person. It is not separating my Southern identity from my economic identity. It is all of it, all bits of me, all at once, and how those kind of interact with each other. Intersectional feminism encourages us to do the same thing. So it kind of stems off of multiracial and multicultural feminism because it talks about, how race also intersects or interacts with gender depression. But it starts to include conversations about classism. It starts to include conversations about sexuality or your status as an immigrant or an immigrant person. So intersectional feminism really starts to take all of the conversations and merge them into one space so that we don't look at one person through the lens of one singular identity, because that's not really how we're going to solve any of the problems that we have. For example, I call mainstream feminism or liberal feminism white feminism, not because these issues exclusively impact white women, but because they are the issues that white women can feel that other women, or there are the issues that all women can feel, but not all white women will feel things like, racial experiences because they're white. And so their experiences are going to be a little different. So they're going to gravitate more towards this mainstream feminism, which will push out women of different identities. It'll push out our LGBTQ community. It'll push out our trans community. It'll push out our lower income communities because the focus is on, closing the wage gap, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That leads us into my personal favorite branch of feminism. This leads to what I have been calling myself for years now, ever since I was a senior in college. This leads us to womanism, which was created by Alice Walker. And she really believes that womanism is like an over-encompassing branch of feminism. Womanism is a lot like intersectional feminism in that it keeps up with the not just like the social, political, economic equality of the sexes. Not only does it include the idea and concept of race, it also includes gender, it also includes sexuality, includes all of it all in one big conversation. However, most one of the most important differences is that it focuses, well, not focuses, but it includes men in the conversation. It doesn't acknowledge men exclusively as like, oh, we need you to help us get along. It's men also have problems, and this is how they should be solved. This is a part of that conversation. Another big tenet, and this is kind of what drew me to womanism, obviously, is that it focuses on the experiences of Black women. And so while it does take into place everybody else's, apply every other idea, while it does focus on, the economic aspects of Marxism, while it includes the environmental aspects of ecofeminism, all of those conversations are centered around the experiences of Black women. And as a Black woman myself, of course, I would obviously be drawn to such a thing, but also because of the way that different identities interact with each other in regards to the Black woman. I personally feel like most conversations should center at least Indigenous women and Black women. Because if we start at, it's kind of like climbing, let me think of a good analogy. Sure, it's kind of like building a pyramid. We'll go with that. And of course, everybody is, feeling some type of oppression in the patriarchal system, the patriarchal pyramid, if you will. But at the top, there are white, wealthy, well-to-do women who experience, probably, I don't want to say the least because it's not really a comparative game, but their experiences with oppression look vastly different from people who are at the base of the pyramid, Black, trans, low income, women of color, women. They're experiencing different layers of oppression that women at the top aren't. It doesn't mean that women at the top are not experiencing oppression. It doesn't mean that women at the top should be excluded from the conversation. But in order to dismantle the entire pyramid, it is much more efficient to just yank the base out from underneath and watch everything kind of collapse around it, as opposed to starting at the top and picking away at the issues bit by bit, grain of sand by grain of sand. And so womanism, and I guess by extension, Black feminism, but especially womanism, really aims to put the people who are experiencing the brunt of the oppression in the center of the conversation. And as we solve the issues that they're experiencing, we also solve everybody else's. So it's more like a ripple effect than anything else. And that is why I personally love womanism. My one big thing, if you're going to call yourself any of these, but especially multicultural, multiracial feminist, intersectional feminist, especially womanist, I encourage you to be willing to decenter and or recenter yourselves in conversations. I've had tons of white people ask me like, oh, can I be a womanist? You can. Alice Walker did say at one point white people couldn't, and then redacted and said that they could. But the point is that you continue to center people of color and especially Black women in those conversations, as opposed to saying, oh, look, I'm intersectional, I care about others, but this conversation is still about me. So those are some of the big tenets of, or big branches of feminism. Of course, there are tons and tons more. We can dive into those later if you'd like. Just leave a comment in the comment section, or you can do your own research on your own time, completely up to you. We're going to come back with final thoughts and our mental health minute in a moment. Stay tuned. All right, time for our final thoughts. So overall, today we've learned a lot about the different branches, the different types of feminism. And the whole point of this conversation is to say all movements are constantly changing. No movement is ever stagnant. The movement for women's rights that we had in the 1900s, where we were advocating for the right to vote, is vastly different from the conversations we are having today. We see this in movements across the board, across all of time. As you know, the movement for the liberation of Black folk did not start and end with Black Lives Matter. It is just another domino in a very long line of dominoes falling on top of each other. That being said, with all of these many options for feminism, you get to pick which one more aligns with the goals that you see valuable. And it's not to say that all the others suck by any means. In fact, they're all incredibly important. It's because we can't always focus all of our energies into so many different pools at once. It is better to have 10 people focusing on 10 different things that link back to each other, as opposed to one person trying to divvy up into 10 different pools all the time. So figure out what's best for you, figure out what you like the most, put your energy that way, but keep your mind open to everybody else's opinions and thoughts and all the different ways we can solve the issues that plague us all. And that is my final thought. For our mental health minute this week, because I want us to focus on mental health in lots and lots of different ways, I want you to read something. I don't mean like, oh, I read tweets, or even I read, like digital webtoons comics, which is like, I read a lot of webtoons comics. This is not like a slight to you, but I want you to read like a book, something that either has paper and you can hold it in your hands, like this, a book, or you can read a digital book. I'm not opposed to the Kindle. I'm not opposed to the e-reader, but I really want you to take some time, set aside 30 minutes, an hour, just pick up something you think you would like to read, you think might be fun. It can even be a comic. It can be, a fluffy love story from the dollar store. It can be a collection of poems. Just pick up something that should have some paper in it, in theory or in practice, and read it for like an hour. Just give your brain a break. Give your brain a break. And that is all that I have for us this week, folks. Thank you all so very much for tuning into Justice with Jordan Simone, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye.